Thank you. That first little tune was by O'Carolyn, and the second kind of rambunctious tune was by Jessica Walsh.
And now we're doing Mrs. Cole by O'Carolyn. Minamula, oh, sorry. Where's my brain? That's aluminum spelled backward. Thank you. Thank you very much. In
That
case,
was a Bob McQuillan tune called Jean Rose Reel.
Bob being a local guy. Johnny Cope.
So here's a tune by my old college friend, Tom Fabonio. He lives in Rockport and composes songs for penny whistle, for cello, piano, guitars, violins.
And he is really who brought us together, because when I lived in Virginia, I was playing Tom Fabonio, riding him up in Massachusetts, and then we suddenly met and said, ooh.
And just for the record, this song we're about to play called Street Piper is dedicated to Chaz by
And John Garvey, and John Yamarino, the three of us.
Okay, Street Piper. to McQuillan, Bob McQuillan. A to Z waltz. Oh, we're going back to O'Carrollin again. This is called Kitty McGinnis. rights of man. Letter from home. Start again. One. One more short song, and we're on to the lecture. This is called Ballad.
Good morning. I am Michael Nadeau, your moderator for today. I am pleased to welcome you to the Monadnock Summer Lyceum with today's guest, Lesley Carhart. Before we get started, I'd like to thank today's musicians, the Gap Mountain Quartet, for providing the music many of you enjoyed while waiting for the live broadcast to begin. Also, thank you to RBC Wealth Management for generously sponsoring today's event, and to the Peterborough Unitarian Universalist Men's Lunch Group for the beautiful flowers. For many years, the Monadnock Summer Lyceum has brought outstanding world-class speakers to the Monadnock region to serve as catalysts to inform, engage, and inspire an active citizenry on local, national, and global issues. Today's talk is being recorded and will soon be available as a podcast and as a video on our website, monadnocklyceum.org. Programs are rebroadcast on WSMN 1590 AM the following Sunday at 10 a.m. and on WUML 91.5 FM the following Wednesday at 11 a.m. and the following Sunday at 3 p.m. As is the tradition of the Lyceum, after the presentation, our speaker will answer questions from the audience. Those present in the meeting house may write your questions on the yellow card in the pew in front of you, and an usher will come around to collect them. For those watching virtually, please submit your questions by using the live comments section on YouTube. The Monadnock Summer Lyceum is supported entirely through contributions from our audience members. We deeply appreciate your donations, which may be placed in the glass bowls in the church and in the parish hall. Those listening at home may make contributions on our website or by mailing your donation. Thank you for your generous support. In your pew, you will find a green card. We hope you will give us feedback on today's program and join our mailing list and/or email list. You can either mail the green card to us or drop it in the bowls alone or with your contribution to the sustainability of the Monadnock Lyceum. For those watching virtually, you may provide feedback on today's program, suggestions for next summer's speakers, make a donation, or join our mailing list through our website. Following the program, we invite you to attend an informal reception in the parish hall through the door to my right. Before I introduce today's speaker, let me say a few words about the cybersecurity community. The profession can be very rewarding, but it can also be chaotic, stressful, and at times even hostile to those who work in it. To thrive, security professionals need the support and guidance of more experienced colleagues willing to share their expertise and encouragement. Our speaker today, Lesley Carhart, is one of those generous members of the cybersecurity community. Lesley has earned the community's respect not just as the Director of Industrial Control Systems Incident Response at Dragos, but by publicly and privately supporting its members. Lesley has stood by colleagues who have been publicly harassed, encouraged those seeking to enter or advance in the profession, and amplified the voices of those promoting good causes or denouncing disinformation. I've seen Lesley's influence in the community grow as a result. Now let's talk about what Lesley does as an incident responder. Recently, the Ledger transcript gave a good account of how Peterborough responded to last year's cyber attack that cost the town over $2 million. If you read that story, you have a basic idea of what incident response is, figuring out how the attack happened, when it happened, who did it, whether it's still happening, and reviewing practices and policies to make sure it doesn't happen again. Lesley's team responds to cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, which includes the power grid, water facilities, communications, and energy. The scale in terms of potential losses, complexity, and impact is far greater and are generally carried out by more sophisticated adversaries, perhaps supported by nation states. Russia, for example, launched its war against Ukraine by taking out satellite communications with a cyber attack that had wider regional consequences. Dealing with this kind of high-stakes incidents gives Lesley a unique insight into the state of digital security in the world today. It is with great honor that I introduce to you our speaker, Lesley Carhart.
Thank you. I really appreciate the wonderful introduction, and it's wonderful to see you all here today. A lot of you are in my UU community as well as I'm in Chicago. I think everybody who has a job, whether it's inside or outside the home, has those moments when they're watching the media or television or movies and they see a portrayal of it. And it just makes them cringe. It makes you just kind of cringe up in a little ball because it's so over-dramatized. And it's so off the mark about what you really do every day and what your work is really like. I have a very dramatic sounding job, specifically when there is a cyber attack against an industrial system, and that's usually critical infrastructure, things like power, oil and gas, water treatment, manufacturing. I run a team of people, which is probably some of maybe under 100 people in the world, who go figure out what happened, what to do next, and do forensic analysis to understand how the attack actually occurred and how to remediate from it. So yes, it's very, very meaningful stuff. And why am I here talking to all of you about this today? Well, it is incredibly important because this is very important work that is being portrayed incredibly wrong in the media, that people like you who are educated, informed citizens, voters, etc., have an understanding of what the problem really is. Because it's not what you see on CSI or NCIS, where they try to portray computer hacking and doing forensics with regards to computer hacking. It's really a serious issue, but the issue is totally different than what you see in movies like Black Hat and things like that. So I want to tell you all what I can. In a relatively short period of time, I have about 35 minutes to teach you a little class. Normally my classes on this are a semester long or at least a week long on this subject about what I do in terms of industrial cyber attack response and why those attacks are happening, what these industrial systems really do and where they are, and what we are doing right now to reduce the rate of these attacks. Because I need your help. I really do, because you go out and vote. And as I will try to convey to you during this talk, these industrial systems are all around us, and some of them are managed at a very municipal level, while others are managed at a more state or federal level. And elections matter. Being involved with your elected officials matters. Even the decisions you make at a municipal level make a big difference to what I see every day. And some of the things that I see in this industrial attack landscape are really disheartening and really sad. Just like the cyber attack against your local area, which is a really unfortunate situation that cost a lot of money. So what I'm going to start with is what are industrial control systems and where do they exist? So let's start with a basic thing. So what is a process? When I talk about an industrial process, at a most fundamental level, when I'm talking about an industrial process, it's us interacting and making something physical happen in the world, usually to produce something. So you have processes in manufacturing. Generating electricity involves multiple processes and sub-processes. A train moving today in modern transportation, that's multiple industrial processes. So it could be moving things kinetically, it could be changing temperatures, changing pressures, things like that, but in the end, you're usually producing or moving something physical. So that's the type of system I interact with. And when we're talking about processes, they usually involve some type of industrial control system. Now, I'm up here talking about whiz-bang cybersecurity techie stuff, but industrial control systems have existed for a very long time. So they could not necessarily be computer-based. At the very earliest industrial control systems, if you go back hundreds of years, even arguably thousands of years, were gears and pulleys, things like that. What is this industrial control device doing? Well, it's making a process go without as much human intervention as would be required to do it manually. So if you're going to do this industrial process by hand as a human being, you're the blacksmith in your shop hammering away at something. But then you want to add elements of automation so you don't have to do it all yourself. Now, yes, you can do that with mechanical things. You can do that with gears and pulleys and levers and things like that. They are making something happen automatically without a human being doing it all the time. But then we got into the era of electricity. And we realized that we could do this better and more efficiently. So now we have industrial control systems that involve electricity. So now we move to the era of like electronic switches and wiring and circuits, simple circuits. And now we can make things more efficient in our industrial processes. We have even less human intervention. So we did that for decades. And then we moved into the era of microchips and transistors and the era of being able to do more complex computer-based things. And now we've made our industrial processes even more effective and efficient because now not only do we have something that's happening automatically, we can have a computer make decisions about when to alter that process and how different processes interact with one another. We can make things much broader scale, and we see these much larger manufacturing operations and transportation infrastructures. So now we can do lots more, and of course, the people who run manufacturing facilities and transportation and power generation, oil and gas, love this stuff because it involves less people and you can do things at this broader scale. Now, I've talked about this life cycle and this evolution of industrial control systems. There's lots of mechanical and simple electronic industrial control systems out there still. They're all over the place. But we're seeing more and more of these digital computerized ones because, again, they're cheap, they're efficient, and they allow you to do things at great scales because now computers are making decisions about these processes. So instead of having to have a bunch of people watch each part of a process, say in manufacturing, the computers talk to one another. And they say, hey, my widgets are coming down the assembly line, and then they're going to be packaged, and we're going to put labels on them. And we know that this is all happening because we're watching this part of the label maker over here, and we're watching the conveyor belt over here, and we're making decisions based on what all of those things are doing together. So that's why things are evolving in this space, and this is why they're becoming much more computerized. All right, so these systems are getting more and more complex, and they're getting more digital and computerized, which means they are connected to more modern computer devices. And that's made them a bigger target for cyber attacks. Now, is that novel or shocking? No, there has always been, as long as there have been human beings and city-states, there has been espionage, there has been sabotage, there's been theft, there's been ransoms. None of that stuff is new. But just like the industrial processes that I'm talking about having to secure, the digital world has made those things much more efficient in a lot of ways, unfortunately. Now somebody can ransom somebody across the world without a lot of additional cost or difficulty, instead of just their local city or market or et cetera. Now we have people who are able to impact industrial processes and conduct things like sabotage or espionage from across the world. Again, people haven't changed, unfortunately. Crime hasn't changed. Warfare hasn't particularly changed. People are trying to accomplish the same things. But the landscape in which they're doing those things has changed. That is what has changed. That's why I have to do this job that I do that is so incredibly misportrayed in the media. So yes, these systems are getting attacked. They are absolutely suffering cyber attacks because people are trying to do the same things that they have always tried to do with regards to infrastructure, with regards to stealing money, things like that. And it's getting worse because these systems are more and more digital, so they can be impacted more by digital means. And people are starting to learn because when a criminal or a hostile state finds something that works, they're going to do it more. It's just like the unfortunate ransomware scenario here. Those business email compromise attacks where people are extorted or tricked into giving away a bunch of money, transferring a bunch of money, they started quite a while ago. They started about 15 years ago. And criminals started reading about them more in the news and realizing they were really effective. And the methodology for doing them became more published, well-known, and effective. So, of course, there's more of them. And we're seeing that same thing in these industrial control systems. The bad guys have realized that they're a pretty good target. People are scared, rightfully so, of manufacturing, oil and gas, water treatment, et cetera, being compromised and going away. So they're more willing to do things like pay ransoms. They're more willing to expend, resources to pay off somebody who's extorting them, et cetera. And during geopolitical conflicts, so things like warfare, they can be hugely impactful and demoralizing to a society. So bad guys realize this. Now, I'm talking about these industrial systems, and I'm telling you that they do really important things, but let's think for a moment about all the places where these exist. So you're surrounded by industrial control systems today, and a lot of them are the digital ones I've talked about. So if you don't have your own well at your home, when you turn on the water and you use municipal water, that's industrial control systems. The water treatment to the water getting to your home or business. Power, transmission, generation, distribution, all controlled by industrial control systems. Manufacturing, and not just manufacturing widgets, but the logistics of getting things shipped out in our just-in-time economy. Transportation, trains run on industrial control systems. A lot of parts of your local airports run on industrial control systems. So they're everywhere. They're even inside your large-scale buildings today. If you work in a large office building, they do things like control your elevators and your heating and cooling. They make sure that your air conditioners work in your data centers. So industrial control systems are super important. These processes that they are controlling do all kinds of things that are really impactful to our lives that we don't notice until they go away. All right? So, so this is impactful stuff. And it's definitely concerning. But at the same time, it's not exactly like the films, because the movies make this really overdramatic. They make the power go out to the whole United States, or they have some major catastrophic failure where something implodes, because it's dramatic and it's exciting, it makes a good movie. But really, there's much more subtle impacts on a society that can come from industrial control systems. And so they can be hugely impactful over time and psychologically and to the health of a society rather than these dramatic things we see on film. Now, I do want to talk to you a little bit more about what an industrial process looks like so that you can understand how they can break in a realistic way. Okay, so I'm going to start with I have no slides here. You're going to have to use your imagination, so close your eyes, start imagining. How many people here, and raise your hand, have gone through one of those automatic revolving doors, the kind where you step into it and the door starts turning? A few of you? Okay, just a couple. I knew there'd be at least 2 of you out there who had walked through an automatic revolving door. All right, so that is a simple industrial process controlled by an industrial control system, okay? Now, every industrial control system is comprised of control loops, and a control loop is 3 things, okay? Bear with me here. There's an actuator. So the actuator is the thing that makes it physically do something. So in the case of the revolving door, it's the motor that makes the door turn. All right, and then there's a sensor. The sensor detects what's happening. It helps the industrial process make a decision about what to do. So in the case of the door, it's a sensor that knows that you're in the door, so it knows to start turning. So you've got an actuator that makes the door turn, and you've got a sensor that knows that you're in the door, so it should start turning. But something has to also be the brain of that. So you have some kind of control device, digital or analog or mechanical control device, that based on the input of the sensor, tells the actuator to do something. Now that could be I stepped on a plate and that made the gears and pulleys turn. But in the case of these revolving doors, it's usually digital. It's a computer. It's a little tiny, pretty simple computer. And what it does is it sees you walked into the door, and the sensor detects that, and it tells the computer, hey, there's somebody in the door. And the computer tells the actuator, start turning the door. And then it keeps checking that every few seconds. And then when you're out of the door, it says, okay, there's nobody there, stop turning. So that's a very, very simple control loop. Now let's think about the things that can go wrong there if somebody starts tampering with these industrial control processes. Okay, so there's really only a few failure states here. So there's a failure state of the process doesn't start when it's supposed to. So somebody walked to the door and it doesn't start turning. Okay, so that's not so bad, it's frustrating, but in the case of a door, that's not a really big deal. There's also, it doesn't stop. So you walk into the door, and the door, you're maybe in the way of the door, and it doesn't stop turning, and you get winged in the head. There's actually, when I was using this example for talks, I actually went and looked up how many people a year get injured by these doors. And it's actually a pretty substantial number of people who get winged in the head by these doors every year. So that does go wrong. And then there's timing issues. Maybe it takes too long to start, or it goes too fast. So those are pretty much the failure states with any of these industrial control system processes. They go when they're not supposed to go, or the timing is totally off on them. But we've thought about a door, because that's easy. We all know about that. But think about something more complex. Think about like a cannery where you're putting tuna fish in cans, or and you have to heat up the cans and you have to put the labels on them. Think about what happens if that gets all wonked up. Then all of a sudden, now you've got like tuna on your conveyor belt, and it's a big mess, and it's disgusting. But then think about something even more life-impacting, like water treatment or power, things like that. All of a sudden, your process not running when it's supposed to, or stopping too soon, or the timing being off on like delivery of chemicals or temperature, can have a huge impact on life and safety. So thinking about these industrial control systems, adversaries have started to realize that they can do really bad things to them by causing those failure states, by tampering with the brains of those control loops in the processes. So telling these processes to do things that they weren't designed to do, that they weren't programmed to do. So who's doing this? All right, so these have to be really, really bad people, yeah? Nobody I'm a fan of, but let's talk about the types of cases I see, okay? So I divide the cases that I see as an industrial incident responder into 3 categories overall. So the first one is commodity criminals. So we absolutely see people trying to make money. Just like everywhere else, criminals have always been it to make money the cheapest, quickest, most efficient way possible. And they're doing that in the industrial control systems too. Again, they've realized that people will pay up, unfortunately. They will pay up, they will pay the ransom, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very, very unfortunate. And you can impact these systems greatly by doing something like ransoming them. It's very disruptive. It's not necessarily going to mess with the little brain of the device that's making the decision about what's happening in manufacturing or the power control, but it can mess up the computers that the people use to see what's going on in it and that it's running safely. And if you can't tell your system, your process is running safely, you have to shut everything down. So that's hugely impactful and disruptive, even though it's not particularly targeted. And they can make a lot of money that way. So we see more and more criminals getting better and better resourced as they get more and more ransom money and more capable of tampering with these systems. And then the second group is insiders, unfortunately. The people who work on these industrial systems are very, very well equipped to do horrible things to them. And we've seen people fired or not promoted or laid off, and then not lose their access to these industrial systems and do nefarious things to them, unfortunately. Now, sometimes that is not purposeful. We have unintentional insider cases as well. So we have people who perhaps get bored at their plant, and they really, really, really want to go watch a movie, but they're on the midnight shift, so they can't do that. So they bring in their USB stick from home, and they plug it in, and they watch their movie, and they infect the entire network. Or they leave their phone plugged in, and there's an internet connection directly into this squishy industrial network. So that happens. Now, the final group of incidents that I respond to is the state-style adversaries. Yes, countries are hacking each other's infrastructure. They're hacking each other's industrial control systems. They aren't doing hugely impactful things right now because there is no geopolitical reason to do that. But they know there might be in the future, unfortunately. So they're going out there and they're building footholds, and they're learning about these industrial networks because they're very complex. They're learning how to impact them in the future. So that's deeply concerning for a lot of reasons. So they've spent years and years at this point embedding into things like water treatment and power, things like that. And if they don't get caught, they just sit there for a long time and try to understand how things work so they can do something meaningful. Again, they have to understand all these control loops. What does the sensor do? What does the actuator do? Are there physical safety controls in place to keep bad things from happening? When are the systems monitored by a human? If they can learn all those things about them, in the future, if there's some geopolitical reason to do something, it's a little bit more lightweight for them to go in and do those nefarious things to those networks. So we catch people doing that kind of reconnaissance and sabotage and espionage, those long-term actions. Now, you've got to wonder why these systems are all vulnerable, right? So we've talked about these systems being vulnerable to these horrible things that we don't want to have happen to our society. Why are they vulnerable? Well, first of all, we talked about these computerized systems to control industrial processes are cheaper, more efficient, people want to use them. Now, that means that the cheapest and most efficient way to build them is to use existing technology that people can just go buy off the shelf. So your normal PCs and your normal network switches, your stuff you use in your company as is, that you go buy for any IT network, hey, we can just plug this into our industrial network and we don't have to build something new. It's cheaper to maintain, it's cheaper to replace. So we have something called IT and operational convergence, where we see these technologies from the IT world being pulled more and more and more and more into these industrial networks. Again, it saves money, saves time, saves people, etc. And these networks are also, unfortunately, different from our enterprise IT networks because they have really long life cycles. So it's like going out and buying a computer in the 1980s from IBM. You go out and you buy a power plant, and all the different pieces that make those control loops happen and those processes happen, and the monitoring and all those things, you buy them as one, and they all work together. And they're all under the same warranty from the company you bought them from, and you can't modify them. You can't replace one part without permission from the vendor, or you lose your warranty. And you can't take them down all the time for maintenance either, because you have like a maintenance window once a year or twice a year. Your facility's doing stuff all the time. So they have very long life cycles. They oftentimes get very, very, very old and out of support. So now you have these normal IT systems, but they're ancient and they're out of date and they're insecure. But they have to exist because they're doing really important things for society or for your business. And you can only bring them down for maintenance or repairs like once a year when you have an outage window to do maintenance on your facility. So these systems become tremendously vulnerable over time, and there's not a lot you can do with that other than to try to keep people out of them because they end up being crunchy candy outside and gooey vulnerable inside. And that's just the nature of these systems. We have to be very adaptable in cybersecurity in them because we can't do all the things that we're used to doing in IT cybersecurity for them. We have to work around the fact that there is a process here that impacts people's life and safety. We can't just shut things down. We have to be cognizant of what systems are impacting what and how they impact safety and when we can actually bring them down safely, things like that. So tough decisions that we have to make. And there's lots of restrictions in what we can do from a cybersecurity standpoint. So we have to be really creative in thinking outside the box about what we can and can't do in terms of cybersecurity. Maybe we can build better defenses on the outside of the network, better monitoring, better detection, place things appropriately in the network so that they can only communicate to the proper points of the network, things like that. But we have to be creative because in the end, the process comes first. People's life and safety comes first. That is our utmost concern, not whiz-bang cybersecurity. And a lot of these verticals that I'm talking about are super low budget. So I told you all I wanted to talk to educated, informed voters here. So let's talk a little bit about what's being done to remediate all of this. So there's a lot of us working very, very hard on this problem, but it's a difficult, challenging problem. Again, these environments, again, the utmost concern is the process. Keeping things in the process running safely, making sure nobody gets hurt, the environment isn't contaminated, the facility doesn't catch on fire, things like that. These are physical things we're interacting with. And there's a lot of restrictions we have to deal with. Now, here's the unfortunate thing. What we focus on is sometimes really, really wrong. First of all, the focus is heavily on cybersecurity, is heavily on the industries that have the most money. So you see a lot of money spent on cybersecurity in things like oil and gas, and to some degree electric power, because those are pretty well-resourced companies. They have money for cybersecurity. They can think about these problems. They can throw people at them. They can buy new technologies. Now, in the United States, we have some other really critical utilities we don't think about so much. So one of those would, of course, be municipal water and sewage. Now, here's a problem in America. A lot of you are much more traveled than that, have been around the world, so you think about things a little bit differently, but a lot of people don't. When we think about a utility failure in the United States, we tend to think about power because that's something we're used to. In the United States, the utility that fails the most, that we are most familiar with having fail on us, is electric power. We have power outages. They are unavoidable due to storms, etc. And we know what that looks like. It's something we can comprehend because we've seen it happen. We know what we do. We get our flashlight, we check our refrigerator, things like that, and we're used to short power outages. So when somebody says somebody's hacking the utilities, hacking industrial control systems, we tend to think, power, 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 they're gonna bring down the grid. The grid is pretty well secured, and it's also, there's not just one grid in the United States, there's 3 of them, and they are a patchwork of incongruous different technologies and companies and things. It would be really resource intensive and difficult to even bring a large portion of the United States power infrastructure down. A regional power grid, yes, sure, but the national infrastructure is reasonably well secured. They're working on that problem really hard. What's not being worked on? Very much at all. Municipal water and sewage. Those are little tiny local utilities. They have maybe 1 IT person in your local water utility, et cetera, sewage utility. They have maybe 1 IT person, much less a cybersecurity person. Water is pretty important, but in the United States, we're not used to water not working or not being drinkable. We are used to turning on the faucet and having drinkable tap water there. That's just a good fortune of us being fortunate enough and blessed to live in a very well-resourced country. There are, of course, places in the United States that don't have clean drinking water, and some of you may notice that more than others, but for the most part, it's not something we think about a lot. That keeps me up at night. There are absolutely these types of nasty people who are thinking about how to tamper with water. We saw that in Oldsmar, Florida last year, where somebody got into an incredibly insecure water facility, and they were able to potentially tamper with chemical levels in drinking water. We've seen a couple high-profile cases in the news about that over the last couple of years. These systems are much more vulnerable. They don't have cybersecurity resources. They can't buy cybersecurity tools. And people aren't thinking about them because they're not used to, we just don't, when you turn on the tap, you get drinking water. That's what we're used to. So transportation is another one. We hardly ever see failures in transportation. We've seen some since COVID in logistics and transportation, but again, we expect the trucks to deliver our UPS packages basically on time. And having a big disruption to that is not something we think about. So less resources, less attention are being paid there. So in terms of legislation, there's some inappropriate focus, certainly. We need to focus more on those less resourced industries. And we need to be careful about over-legislating without providing resources. Because what I've seen a lot lately in this space, as people have gone to vote and our elected officials have talked about these problems, which is good, we want them talking about them, is that they say, okay, now you all have to have these whiz-bang cybersecurity tools. And those verticals, a lot of them, aren't provided any additional resources to do those things, to buy tools, to hire people, to talk to people like me, things like that. And yes, my organization, and I do a lot of volunteer work, we're out there as much as we can doing pro bono work for utilities that have no resources because it's important, because it matters. But at the same time, we can only do so much with no resources, no funding, no ability to give them technology, things like that. There's a lot of stuff that's being missed because, again, the media has been portraying there's going to be this whiz-bang power outage across the country because that's what you see in the movies. And no, I'm much more concerned about a metropolitan area getting bad drinking water and nobody noticing for weeks. Or the embedding of adversaries into our infrastructure that goes unnoticed for a very, very long time. There are a lot of problems to tackle here. We need more people, and we need more people thinking about these potential issues. And I hope that I've given you a little bit of an understanding of why these problems exist, too, in terms of why these technologies are vulnerable and why they have to exist in the state that they exist in, so what these industrial processes are. I thank you for your time. I hope that I've given you things to think about today and things to consider as you go to talk to your elected officials and you go to make decisions about your voting. This is very much a bipartisan issue. It's an issue that impacts all of us, and I'm out here every day facing it. And I hope that you think about it outside the context of what you see in films in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this on? Thank you, Lesley, for your insightful thoughts on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. We have some time for questions from the audience. For those watching virtually, you may continue to submit your questions using the live comments section on Facebook or YouTube. While the ushers collect the yellow cards, let me begin by asking Lesley this, and this ties into your comment about elections. The midterm elections are coming up.
They are.
And there's been some news lately about the security of those elections. What are some of the realistic concerns citizens should have about voting machines and the rest of the critical infrastructure that supports the election process?
It's a complicated issue that has been made overly political, which makes it difficult to do the things that need to be done. Are voting in a vacuum, are voting machines vulnerable? In a vacuum, yes. We have an entire village dedicated to them at the largest hacking conference in the United States. It's called Voting Village, and there's a focus on those voting machines. But when we're thinking about vulnerability, we have to think about the overall process. So again, I was talking about processes earlier, and processes exist all over the place. And when you're thinking about cybersecurity and vulnerability, you need to think about the overall process that devices fit into, not just the devices themselves. So you've got to think about end to end. Are the votes secure? That's the process, right? The process is votes being authentically and securely transferred from registered voters to election officials, right? So overall, the process is quite secure. Now, do I want to see voting happen on the internet? Absolutely not. Internet-based voting is a terrible idea. There's too many layers of vulnerability without enough checks and balances there. Electronic voting machines, as long as there is a paper record and people are following the process for vetting those votes, there is a process there which is secure by design, even if the individual machines might be less vulnerable. Are there things that we need to look at in terms of those e-voting machines? Yes, absolutely. There's always ways we can make things more secure, and we're looking at that. But is the overall process of using electronic voting machines with paper records to back them up secure? Yes, it is by and large statistically very secure.
So a member from the audience asks, how difficult is it to ferret out foreign footholds in our strategic infrastructure?
It's a pain. It's a pain in the behind. So it involves a lot of things. So first of all, it involves somebody actually going out and looking at those environments, and that can be challenging. That means a lot of these environments, again, they're very different from the IT environments. So in a lot of cases, they've been ignored for a really long time because people are scared to touch them and look at them because they're those scary process things where the electrical engineers work and things. But these are computer networks now, and they have to be secured. So that means that somebody actually has to go out there and look at these networks and start looking for signs of there being somebody intruding into them. And that means looking at their vulnerabilities, looking at what exists in them, and how they could potentially be hacked. And that's something that sometimes it's scary. It's a scary process to begin. But these footholds do exist. We find them. Sometimes we see them from the outside, actually. So we have a intelligence group at my company, and they look at internet traffic. They look at what computers on the internet are talking to what other computers, so outside of people's internal networks. And they'll see communications from like a power provider to Russia or something, and they're like, that's not supposed to be happening. I don't think that's supposed to be happening. So they'll have to reach out to that provider, that manufacturing company, and say, hey guys, I think there might be something wrong here. You really need to look at this. So we can see sometimes from the outside that those footholds potentially exist. And the organizations themselves don't even know because they haven't implemented or been able to afford enough cybersecurity to know that that's happening. We also see that in terms of ransom attempts. So we see people staging to ransom a company in advance, and they haven't had any cybersecurity in their industrial environment because they don't resource that, and they don't care about it, and they're scared of it. And we have to give them the bad news that they're about to get ransomed. Somebody's pre-staging to ransom their company,
So another member of the audience asks, what can an individual do to protect themselves and their community?
Yeah, so it's a complex question in terms of cybersecurity in general. some basic advice I can give you as individuals to make your lives more secure. Number one, use multi-factor authentication on everything you possibly can use it on. So what's multi-factor authentication? Well, it can be the SMS sent to your phone when you log into something. That's okay. Better is to have like an authenticator application on your phone that has a code that you type into the website when you're logging in. That's much better. And now they have like YubiKeys that you plug into the computer. So multi-factor just means something in addition to your password that you have to use every time you log into things. That makes it much, much harder for bad guys to do their job. That stops a huge number of attacks. They just give up because, again, they want to make money the least effort possible. So they want to commit crimes that don't take a lot of work. And if you put that tiny little barrier in their way, they'll just stop. So that's huge. Get a password manager if you can. A password manager is an application on your computer that stores passwords for all your websites and things, and it generates a strong new password for every single website. So you don't have to remember them anymore. You don't have to use the same one. Using the same password for lots of things, really, really bad. That's one of the worst things you can be doing is reusing the same password from multiple websites. Because if it gets stolen from one, the bad guys are going to try it on every other website out there. So use a password manager if you can. If you can't use a password manager, if it's too complicated, have a notebook and use a different password for every website and write it in your notebook. You know, it sounds crazy for a cybersecurity person to say that, but I'm pragmatic. So if that's what's worked for you, just use a different password for every website, no matter how you manage that. So those are two places you can really start, and just pay attention. If something doesn't feel right in your email or your messages, stop and ask somebody. Just stop and ask somebody. Cybersecurity people like me, we're supposed to be your friends. We're not supposed to be out to get you. If something doesn't feel right in an email you got, a request you got, a text message you got, ask somebody. Ask your cybersecurity people at your work. Ask somebody else for a second opinion. You know, just there's a lot of people out there trying to do bad things.
Okay. Another member of the audience asks, when you respond to an attack, what are the first steps you take? What things do you analyze? That is, system logs, packet captures, et cetera.
Yeah, oh, that's a really good technical question. Yeah, so the first pieces of evidence that I typically collect are the most volatile ones. So they're the ones that I'm going to lose if you turn off your computer. A long time ago in computer forensics, they would tell you in classes, or if you were a lawyer or a police officer, the first thing you do is shut off the computer so that they can yank it and take it away in an evidence box. We don't do that anymore. Because now we've learned in the modern era of forensics and investigations that there's a lot on your computer that goes away when you switch the off switch off. And a lot of that can tell really interesting details about what happened in the computer and if it's infected with a virus, things like that. So the things that I want to collect first in those cases are the things that are going to be gone first. So things like computer memory, what's up on the screen, I take pictures. Then also things like you said, like packet captures, things that are going across the network. Anything that's going to go away quickly is the thing I want to collect first. So if you do think that you have something going on your work computer that's suspicious, the temptation can be to unplug the computer from the wall. Usually, if I could put my wish list in front of my users that they do investigations with, it's leave the computer on and ask us what to do. Ask us what you should do with the computer.
Okay. Another question, how about backup emergency systems to put into play when the primary one is compromised?
Yeah, so that's a challenging question too. So a lot of these processes do have redundant systems, but oftentimes they're on the same network. I don't see a lot of segmentation between them. Cyber attacks aren't really a thing that were taken into account, unfortunately. There's a lot of things taken into account from a safety perspective, and we are very blessed to have that in the cybersecurity space and processes because it eliminates some possibilities for attacks. So if they put in all these physical safety controls into a process to keep the place from catching on fire, well, that's fantastic because now even if there's a cyber attack, the place isn't going to catch on fire. Maybe they put a pressure release valve or something on the physical system so it just can't explode. It can't catch on fire. That's fantastic. But there are things from a cyber attack perspective that haven't been thought of. Like what if somebody tampers with the system and the redundant system at once because they're on the same network? And that will be equally effective. It doesn't matter that there's redundancy there then because they can both be victims of a cyber attack at exactly the same time if it's purposeful. So unfortunately, it's hit or miss.
Okay. Another question, is quantum computing on the horizon? And if so, would this protect town, state, and national systems?
You know, it's one of those vaporware things. Yes, will quantum computing be a relevant thing in the future, in 10 years, 15 years? Yes. Is it something that's impactful to the problems I face in the near future? No. I'm still dealing with Windows 95 computers. I'm still dealing with Windows XP computers. The computers that are running these things that are critical to our lives are by and large things that you used 10, 20 years ago. And they will be for a long time because of those very long life cycles. Again, you buy a power plant, you're buying equipment to use for 20, 30 years. So like the new ones that are being put out there have maybe Windows 10 installed, but they will have Windows 10 probably when I retire, because it's not gonna go away. Those systems don't get upgraded. So it's nice to think about all these whiz-bang future technologies, but I'm not gonna see them in the industrial space probably during my career.
What is an example of a common attack vector to cause harm to a local municipality's water or sewage system?
Yeah, so the most high-profile case that made the news that you can read about is Oldsmar, Florida. And that was just a horribly unfortunate case of, after the pandemic started, a lot of small utilities desperately needed remote access to their industrial processes right away. And they did it they had no IT people, they had no money, so they had to do it on the cheap, the simplest way they could, the fastest they could. And you know, they do that. You can't have things cheap, easy, and fast. You just can't do that. That doesn't exist. They did it the quickest way they could in that case too. It was another small utility, but serving a large portion of a larger metropolitan area in Florida. And they put this remote access application on one of their computers that ran the control system, and it was totally insecure. And pretty much anybody on the internet had the potential to get into that system, ultimately, and tamper with the controls for the water system. Now, did you have to know something about the water system to cause an impact? Again, control loops, processes, you know, sensors, actuators, and controllers. You have to know how that stuff works, kind of, yes, but can you Google maybe what would be meaningful in a water system and start poking at things? Yeah, somebody can probably do that. So that's what happened here. And fortunately, an operator caught it. They saw that somebody was tampering with their control system. So thankfully, there was another check and balance in there that prevented larger catastrophe. But yeah, I mean, these systems are touchy and sensitive in a lot of cases. Yes, there's a lot of safety controls in place, physical and human and analog, things like that, but somebody who knows what they're doing or just hits a lot of buttons can definitely cause something meaningful to happen in them.
Okay, this is something we were talking about before this session began. Please talk about governmental regulations that require all industrial systems to maintain state-of-the-art cybersecurity systems, and how can we, as average citizens, be assured that that they're adequate?
Yeah, so I talked about that a little bit at the end, how a lot of the legislation I'm seeing is just, hey, here's the list of whiz-bang things you need to install, which are great. I wish everybody could afford them and implement them and monitor them and use them properly. They require care and feeding. But that requires people and money and time. And so when we talk about legislation, especially for municipalities and states, for the utilities they run, and for less resourced industries that we care about, like transportation, things like that, we have to be willing to commit to getting them the resources they need to use that stuff. Not just telling them, hey, here's a list of stuff you need to buy at millions of dollars, or even just handing them this stuff and saying, here, go install this. You have to give them people. You have to give them education. You have to give them financial resources to maintain and support this stuff. You have to be willing to invest in this stuff beyond just, hey, we made a law. Okay, you made a law and that's great, but the local ma and pa sewage treatment plant does not have the resources to do all this stuff. If you tell them by law they have to do this and they're going to be audited, something else is going to get dropped. By nature, it's going to have to get dropped. So they're going to stop updating their other computers or something, and they're going to get ransomed because they've been told they have to do all this stuff. So really the important thing here is understanding, hey, there's this wide landscape of utilities that are vulnerable, and some of them more than others, especially the ones we don't think about as much because they never go down. And they desperately need more resources. And what does that look like? Well, CISA is doing some great work. DHS's CISA organization is providing a lot of community resources and education and training, which are really some of the more important things. Also information sharing between these agencies. That kind of soft, kind of boring stuff is really important. The National Guard is also doing some interesting stuff in terms of providing free incident response for some of these municipalities as well. So doing what I do for those organizations who can't afford me and my team, et cetera, and we can't provide pro bono resources for everybody, but the National Guard is doing some of that now. So they're training up their people to help at least with incident response in those cases. So there are good efforts going on, but a lot of them are much more under-resourced than the things that really make the headlines. Like, hey, TSA said this big thing needs to be done to everybody, and that's whiz-bang, and it made headlines. No, people need simple things. They need people. They need training classes. They need resources.
Another question from the audience. Are there some technologies that people would be surprised that you do not have or use in your home, like Alexa, Facebook, and do you cover your camera or the camera on your laptop?
Oh, yes, I do cover the camera on my laptop. I have a door on mine that opens and closes. And yeah, again, it depends on, I'll use a phrase here. It's called threat model. And I could stand here and talk to you all about things all day. Oh my goodness. But threat model, everybody's threat model is different. Your threat model is what threats you as an individual face. And it's different for everybody. It's different when you're in different places and in different situations. It changes through your life. When you work for different employers, when you're in different countries. Your threat model is always changing. So who could be targeting you and how likely is that and how effective would they be? And that's different if you are, say, working for a company that's a big target for another country, or you are getting out of an abusive relationship. Your threat model changes for lots of different reasons. And the technologies you should be using and how you should secure them changes dependent on your threat model. And everybody in this room should sit down there with their family and think about what their threat model really is. Who could realistically be targeting you? And how would they do that? Again, do they have motive, means, and opportunity? What's actually a plausible scenario? And what you use in terms of your phone and your technologies and smart devices in your home should be based on your personal threat model, and that might change over time. You might, at one job, in one situation with your relationships and your family, say it's fine to have an Alexa in your home. You know that the potential risk there is that Amazon's recording everything you say in your house. I'm not a huge fan, but you know if you think the convenience is worth that, maybe that fits into your threat model. But maybe you start working for somewhere more sensitive, or you have a divorce or something, and all of a sudden it'd be really bad if everything in your house is recorded. I lived in an apartment a while back that installed company-monitored smart locks on the doors that they could open and close and monitor the use of. And I actually ended up doing a security report to their company about how insecure they were and moving out of the apartment over them. Not because I have a problem with smart locks. Smart locks are great because you can't pick them or bump them if you want to keep somebody from stealing your TV. But for the fact that I realized that the way they hooked them up to your Wi-Fi, anybody who had ever logged into your Wi-Fi network could open your door. Yeah, anybody who had ever had your Wi-Fi password could now, it was 13 seconds we figured it out, they could open your door. And so it's different people, different threat models. Like if you're concerned about somebody who you had a divorce from going into your house, that's a really big deal. If you're just concerned about somebody stealing your big screen TV, maybe the smart lock is way more secure than the quick set lock that was on the apartment door. But that's my quick and dirty lecture on threat models.
Last question, Lesley. Since many OT systems are live and running, where can computer professionals go to learn how to secure ICS without buying a power plant?
Oh, yes, don't buy a power plant. So if you work for one of those organizations, oftentimes they'll have a digital twin system, or they'll have maintenance windows where you can poke at things. So they'll have like a practice lab, they call it a digital twin system. So if you work for those organizations, look for something like that. So they have a lab where they test their software, things like that before they deploy it. If you just want to learn it on your own, pick a vertical. because electric is totally different from water, and it's totally different from trains, and it's totally different from airplanes. They're all very different. So pick a vertical and start to read up on how the manufacturers work in that space. And a lot of them do produce some training test sets for their equipment, so you can buy things on eBay for a couple $100s to work with their equipment. But other than that, it's a lot of researching and understanding processes. My job is every day is an episode of How Stuff Works, which I think is great. Not everybody likes that. But I have to understand how like eggs are packaged one day, and the next day how an oil refinery works, because in the end, it's all about the process and the consequences to the process that can happen. So that's what you need to understand first and foremost, is pick a vertical and start understanding at a high level the process and what can go wrong and what pieces of equipment are involved in that.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Lesley, for sharing your time and expertise with us.
It was my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed today's live broadcast of the Monadnock Summer Lyceum, the last for this year. Thank you for your support of our 2022 season. We look forward to seeing you again next summer, and we encourage you to contact us with any comments on this season or recommendations for 2023. Now please join us for an informal reception in the Parish Hall through the door to my right. There you will have the opportunity to engage in further conversation with our speaker and enjoy cold drinks. Please respect social distancing when approaching our speaker. Thank you.